Nevada has over 600 documented ghost towns, more abandoned settlements than most states have counties, and buried inside those forgotten places, collapsed silver camps, dried up railroad stops, canyon towns that nobody drives through anymore, are land listings that will make you check the decimal point twice. 80 acres for $576, not per acre. Total, 10 acres for $6,500, owner financed at $150 a month. A 6-parcel block of vacant town lots in a real Nevada county for under $10,000. These are not errors. These are documented listing prices pulled from active real estate records. Meanwhile, the median home in Las Vegas is pushing $500,000. 1 acre of raw Clark County land trades above $150,000. So you could own more than 80 acres of Nevada, Mountain View's Bureau of Land Management land as your neighbor, your name on the deed, for less than what a single acre costs in the same state. That gap is not an accident. It's the product of a very specific history, a century-long boom-bust mining cycle that built cities overnight and erased them just as fast, leaving behind land that nobody wanted badly enough to push the price back up. Silver camps that held 20,000 people were empty inside of a decade. County seats reverted to open desert. The ore ran out, and the market for the surrounding land essentially froze in place. This video covers 10 of those Nevada ghost towns where that price gap is most dramatic, what happened to each place, why the land around it is priced the way it is, and what a buyer who actually understands the conditions is looking at. Here are 10 Nevada ghost towns where ranches are so cheap, you'll think it's a scam. RHYOLITE. In August of 1904, 2 prospectors found gold in the Bullfrog Hills on the eastern edge of Death Valley. Within 2 weeks, 1,200 people had set up camp. Within 3 years, RHYOLITE had 8,000 residents, concrete sidewalks, electric lights, water mains, and an opera house. By 1920, the population was 14. The collapse wasn't gradual. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake triggered a financial panic that choked off investment capital across the western United States. Deep vein mining needed that capital to stay operational. Without it, the mines stalled. Workers left first, then merchants, then everyone else. RHYOLITE went from sophisticated city to empty ruin in roughly the same amount of time it took to build. What remained is still there today, and it's genuinely striking. The 3-story concrete bank building stands intact, walls solid, windows long gone, interior open to whatever weather the Mojave delivers. The Tom Kelly Bottle House, constructed from 50,000 discarded beer and liquor bottles set in cement, is still structurally sound more than a century later. These aren't subtle remnants that require historical imagination. They're structures that people drive 3 hours from Las Vegas to photograph. And that drive is getting more common, not less. The gateway town of Beatty sits just outside the RHYOLITE site, and its position in the tourism economy is strengthening. Rural Nevada destinations accessible only through private hosts account for over 70% of the frontier tourism market. There's no hotel chain absorbing that demand. Younger travelers are actively seeking remote destinations that feel undiscovered, and RHYOLITE delivers that in a way that a polished resort cannot replicate. Airbnb reported that rural hosts operating in areas with no hotel competition earned nearly $10 billion nationally in 2025. The Nevada Ghost Town Corridor captures a documented share of that demand, and it runs almost entirely without the supply-side competition that urban markets face. A landowner near Beatty isn't competing with a Marriott. They're the only option within a substantial radius, which is a structural advantage that most short-term rental operators never have. Desert parcels near Beatty list between $5,000 and $15,000. Land in Las Vegas runs over $150,000 per acre. The same state, a different world. Belmont. Most Nevada ghost towns collapsed fast. Belmont didn't. Silver was struck there in 1865, and the town held on for a full 20 years, long enough to become the Nye County seat, to run 2 competing newspapers, to construct the Cosmopolitan Music Hall. At its height, Belmont supported an estimated 15,000 people and 6 operating mills that pulled $15 million worth of silver ore from the surrounding hills. Then the ore ran thin, the capital dried up, and everyone left. But the way they left map tells you something important. Lumber was so scarce in the high desert that residents didn't just walk away from their buildings. They stripped the roofs off and hauled the timber to whatever boomtown was next. Belmont's ruins are roofless not from neglect or weather, but from deliberate salvage. The brick walls are intact at eye level, open to the sky above, slowly filling with a century and a half of accumulated dust. It's an unusual kind of ruin, like more planned than accidental. The Belmont Courthouse is the most iconic structure remaining, two-story brick preserved as a state historical site, which means it draws visitors consistently without requiring any investment from nearby landowners. And Dirty Dick's Saloon is still operating. Belmont is technically a living ghost town, which gives it a social dimension that truly abandoned sites lack. For a buyer considering an off-grid homestead, having a functioning social anchor nearby, even a very small one, is a meaningful quality of life factor. Elevation matters here too. Belmont sits in high desert terrain that runs meaningfully cooler than the basin floors to the south. That makes it a viable candidate for seasonal retreats or year-round off-grid living without the heat problem that derails plans at lower elevations. The combination of preserved architecture, an operating saloon, and a state historical site means Belmont generates its own foot traffic without any private development required. That's a fundamentally different situation from raw desert parcels with nothing nearby to draw visitors. Comparable Nye County parcels, including configurations in the nearby Johnnytown site, have listed at $30,000 for 8-lot groupings. Property tax in Nye County runs at just over 0.5% annually. The carrying cost on a $30,000 parcel is negligible. Berlin. The town of Berlin produced $849,000 in gold between 1863 and the early 1900s. That's a modest haul by Nevada standards. Enough to keep a camp running, not enough to draw serious capital or build lasting infrastructure. Berlin faded quietly when the mine stopped paying, but the land around it turned out to contain something that dwarfs the gold entirely. The area holds the densest known concentration of ichthyosaur fossils in the world, marine reptiles, 225 million years old. Some of them reached 60 feet in length and weighed 40 tons. The site is now Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park, and it draws a visitor category that no other ghost town on this list can match. Families and school groups arriving specifically for the paleontology. That distinction matters for a land buyer near Gabs or Ione. The tourist draw is state-funded and permanent. It doesn't depend on the boom and bust cycle, doesn't require marketing investment from individual landowners, and pulls a demographic, parents with children, that has disposable income and a specific appetite for experiences that feel educational. A property positioned around the prehistoric narrative is competing in a different, less crowded niche than the standard Wild West glamping pitch. The preserved Berlin town site itself is part of the park, including its 30-stamp mill and the Diana mine. A visitor arriving to see the ichthyosaurs is also walking through a functioning ghost town. Two distinct experiences in the same location. For a landowner nearby offering accommodation, that dual draw extends the length of stay and the willingness to pay. 40-acre tracts in the surrounding area list under $30,000. The park exists, the visitors come. The buyer who buys land near Berlin isn't creating a draw, they're positioning next to one that's already operational. Unionville. Samuel Clemens arrived in Unionville in 1861 during a snowstorm, expecting silver to be lying on the ground. He found a canvas-roofed cabin where stray cattle occasionally fell through the ceiling. He left without striking anything, later writing that he had developed a deep allergy to shovels. That account ended up in Roughing It, his memoir of life in the American West, which has remained continuously in print. Unionville is, in a specific and unusual way, a literary landmark. And that's not a trivial distinction in a state where most ghost towns offer only geology and architectural ruins as their narrative. The town once served as the Humboldt County seat and housed 1,500 people. Fewer than 20 live there now. The nearest services, gas, groceries, anything resembling a supply run, are an hour away in any direction. That isolation explains why small lots near Rye Patch Reservoir list as low as $5,900, and 40-acre desert ranches here consistently come in under $20,000. The Old Pioneer Garden Country Inn has operated in Unionville since the 1970s, family-owned and continuously running. That's not a trivial data point, it's evidence that people seek this place out intentionally, not as an accident on a road trip, but as a destination. The Twain Connection creates a buyer type that doesn't show up at most Nevada ghost towns, someone who values literary history and wants a place with a specific story attached to it. That buyer tends to look different from the survivalist or the speculator, and they're willing to pay a premium for the narrative. Unionville also sits in a canyon setting that is notably lush by Nevada standards. The terrain provides natural shelter and a visual character that flat desert parcels simply don't have. For a buyer weighing off-grid options across the state, the combination of canyon topography, flowing literary history, and sub-$20,000 acreage makes Unionville a harder case to dismiss than its population count of fewer than 20 might suggest. The isolation is real, and the buyer should be clear about what it means operationally. 1 hour to services is not an occasional inconvenience. It's a condition of living there. For the right person, that's exactly what they're paying for. Jarbidge. Jarbidge sits in a deep canyon in the northeast corner of Elko County, and getting there is not straightforward. The canyon walls are steep, the road in is rough, and in a serious winter, snowdrifts 20 to 30 feet high close the canyon entirely for weeks at a time. Automobiles were so slow to penetrate the terrain that the town relied on horse and wagon logistics well into the 20th century. Gold was discovered there in 1909, the last gold rush in American history. A few years later, in 1916, a mail stage robbery in the area produced the first murder conviction in legal history based on palm print evidence. A bloody print on a piece of mail, conviction of a man named Ben Cool. That combination of firsts, last gold rush, first palm print conviction, is a remarkable concentration of historical significance for a canyon that most people have never heard of. The land around Jarbidge and the wider Elko County region is where Nevada's prices reach their lowest documented levels. 80 acres outside Wells, $576, cash. 10 acres in Montello, $6,500 at $150 per month. Owner financing in parts of this county is available for as little as $247 down. That last figure, $247, makes land ownership in the American West accessible to a buyer category that no other real estate market in the country serves. The ruggedness that keeps Jarbidge isolated also keeps it intact. The canyon has not been developed because development requires access, and access here has always been conditional on the weather cooperating. What that produces over more than a century is a place that looks almost exactly as it did during the gold rush, not because anyone preserved it, but because the terrain made transformation impractical. That's a rare quality in the American West, where most historic landscapes have been altered beyond recognition. The explanation for the pricing is direct. The canyon is hostile. The isolation is extreme. The infrastructure is absent. When those three conditions combine, the traditional buyer disappears from the market entirely, and prices find their floor where only the specifically motivated buyer remains. For that buyer, Jarbidge is exactly the thing they've been searching for. Hamilton. In 1867, a silver vein was discovered on Treasure Hill in White Pine County. It was 40 feet wide and only 28 feet below the surface. 5,000 people arrived in year one. By 1870, the population across the Hamilton district, including the satellite communities of Treasure City and Shermantown, had reached 24,000. The strike was so accessible and so rich that the growth was almost frictionless. Hamilton has architectural details that are genuinely unusual. The arched brick Wells Fargo building is still standing. Some structures were patched with flattened tin cans, a detail that tells you exactly how fast the town assembled and how improvised its materials were. The site sits at high elevation, which means those ruins have absorbed 150 years of harsh desert weather, a fact that's visible in every remaining wall. That elevation is also the reason access is restricted. Roads to Hamilton shut down completely in winter. In summer, high-clearance four-wheel drive vehicles are required. That seasonal barrier suppresses prices in a specific way. It effectively removes the year-round buyer from consideration and leaves only the recreational buyer, which means land here is undervalued relative to its visual and historical appeal. Vacant residential lots in nearby Cherry Creek have sold under $5,000. White Pine County carries the lowest effective property tax rate of any county covered in this video, sitting at 0.46%. A parcel held here for years without active development accumulates minimal carrying costs. For a buyer who wants a base camp, a staging point for accessing high desert terrain in good weather, Hamilton's pricing structure makes that a low friction proposition. The seasonal access limitation that suppresses prices is the same condition that makes the terrain around the site exceptional. High altitude desert with views that the road accessible parts of Nevada simply don't offer. Goldfield. In 1906, Goldfield was the largest city in Nevada, 20,000 residents, 5 banks, building lots changing hands at $45,000. In the currency of 1906, the town had the weight of a city that people expected to remain. In 1923, a moonshine still exploded. The fire burned 53 city blocks. The town never rebuilt at scale. Today, Goldfield has 234 permanent residents and is the Esmeralda County seat. Vacant land in town, a 6-parcel block, has sold for $9,997. Abandoned fixer-uppers have listed for as low as $11,000. The county's median annual property tax bill is $594. Esmeralda County's median home value is $95,500 against a national figure that runs over $400,000. These are not distressed numbers in a market that's struggling. They're the numbers of a county where the demand conditions are simply different. What Goldfield has that most ghost towns don't is a functioning tourism infrastructure built on unconventional attractions. The International Car Forest, vehicles buried nose first in the desert floor, doors and hoods open, paint weathering into something that reads as sculpture. It pulls thousands of photographers annually. Goldfield sits on what's been called the Free Range Art Highway, a loosely defined road trip circuit connecting Nevada's stranger landmarks. The area holds a dark sky designation, which means visibility conditions on clear nights are exceptional, and stargazing is a legitimate revenue driver for properties with outdoor space. That dark sky status is not a minor amenity. Light pollution has made genuinely dark skies increasingly rare across the American West, and travelers who prioritize stargazing are an organized, well-documented market. A property with open sky access and no competing light sources within a wide radius is offering something that money cannot manufacture in an urban or suburban setting. Goldfield delivers that by default. Documented short-term rental operations in this region, the eclectic desert home, and the Gold Point ghost town bed and breakfast among them demonstrate that the demand exists and that the rural host model works here precisely because there are no hotels to compete with. Montello. Montello didn't have a dramatic origin story, no legendary silver strike, no gold rush mythology, no famous resident who wrote about it later. It was a railroad town in eastern Elko County near the Utah border, sitting below Pilot Peak, a navigation landmark that westbound wagon trains used to orient themselves crossing the Great Basin before roads existed. The real estate market here doesn't need a dramatic backstory. The listings speak clearly enough on their own. 10-acre parcels list at $10,499. 40-acre tracts have come in as low as $19,000. No utilities included, no municipal water, no connection to any grid. The total absence of infrastructure is what holds prices at these levels, and for a specific category of buyer, that absence is the product. Parts of Elko County operate under minimal zoning restrictions. A buyer can construct a barn-dominium, a steel barn converted into a living space, without the permitting friction that counties with active zoning impose. Permanent RV placement is viable. Non-conventional structures are legally possible. For the off-grid buyer who's been blocked by urban and suburban county regulations, Elko County's light regulatory environment is not a warning sign. It is the entire reason to buy here. Bureau of Land Management land surrounds most of these parcels, which effectively extends the usable territory far beyond the deeded boundary. A 10-acre parcel that borders open BLM land gives the owner access to a corridor that expands their operational range without adding to the purchase price. In a region where the product is space and silence, that adjacency is a real asset. A buyer who pays $19,000 for 40 acres here is not just buying 40 acres. They're buying a private staging point into an effectively unlimited public land corridor that the state manages at no cost to them. McGILL. McGill is the outlier on this list. Kennecott Copper Corporation built it in the early 20th century for copper production. Not silver, not gold. Kennecott designed the town from scratch, including a housing tier system called Step Up that assigned homes by worker rank. The town had an organizational logic baked into its street layout that most boom towns, assembled in chaos, never had. When Kennecott wound down operations, McGill was left in a state of organized abandonment. The housing stock didn't collapse. The street grid neighborhood stayed intact. The industrial era architecture has aged into something that reads as nostalgic rather than derelict, which attracts a different kind of short-term rental guest. Someone who wants a time capsule experience rather than a ruins tour. The short-term rental data for McGill is the most credible on this list. The surrounding region reinforces the pattern. Panaca, a nearby rural Nevada market anchored by Cathedral Gorge State Park, carries a market score of 84.89 with average annual revenue of $22,259. Proximity to a state or national park is the consistent variable driving performance across this part of Nevada, and McGill sits next to Great Basin National Park, which provides a non-seasonal visitor base that doesn't peak and crash the way purely tourism-dependent markets do. People come to the park in spring, summer, and fall, and they need somewhere to stay. McGill's documented market score sits at 84.58 with average annual short-term rental revenue of $26,679. For context, that figure lands above what many secondary urban markets generate from short-term rentals, and it's coming from a county where residential lots start around $5,000. A nearly 5-acre parcel in the East Creek area has listed at $85,000, the highest entry point on this list, but still dramatically below what 5 acres near a national park would cost in most western states. McGill is the middle ground pick. More infrastructure than the truly abandoned towns, a real community, and an income story backed by actual numbers rather than speculation. Cherry Creek and OREANA. Cherry Creek in White Pine County has existed as a mining town for 140 years. The terrain around it offers unobstructed 360-degree views of mountain ridges and valley floors, the kind of panorama that commands multi-million-dollar premiums in Colorado. Town lots with that view have listed at $9,995. OREANA sits in Pershing County near the base of the Humboldt Range. 80 acres with a seasonal creek running through the property has listed at $59,995. Neighboring ridgetop parcels in the Humboldt Range, 320 acres of high elevation terrain, have come in at $50,000 total. And then there's Crescent Valley in Eureka County, 4.3 acres of what the listing describes as a mini ranch, priced at $3,000. That number is the price reveal this video has been building toward. It sits within the range of what some households spend on a single piece of furniture. It is, somehow, the documented asking price for land in the American West. The views at Cherry Creek are not imagined. They exist because the property sits at elevation in a region where development is distant enough that the horizon is unobstructed in every direction. The seasonal creek at OREANA is actual water moving through 80 acres that costs less than a used car. These aren't abstractions or aspirational descriptions. They're physical characteristics of real properties that are priced this low because conventional market metrics have no framework for them. Distance to schools, walkability scores, commute calculations, none of those apply here. When the standard valuation model doesn't work, prices land wherever the market actually clears. The ridgetop parcels in the Humboldt Range are the clearest illustration of what this list has been demonstrating across 10 towns. 320 acres at elevation, with mountain and valley views in every direction, for $50,000 total. A buyer in Colorado or California looking at equivalent terrain would be operating in a market where that same acreage at that same elevation carries a price tag in the millions. The difference is not in the land, it's in the demand. Nevada's interior has the terrain without the buyers who would otherwise drive the price upward, and that gap is the entire opportunity. For a buyer with a clear picture of what they're looking at, Cherry Creek and OREANA are the closing argument for everything this video has covered. Nevada's 600 ghost towns are the physical record of what happens when a resource runs out and the people who came for it leave. The land stays. The price drops to wherever it needs to go to find a buyer willing to deal with what's actually there. No utilities, no neighbors, no infrastructure, none of the conditions a conventional real estate market would consider move-in ready. The towns on this list each arrived at their current price through a specific sequence. A resource discovery, rapid population growth, a collapse triggered by exhausted ore or withdrawn capital, and then decades of stasis while the surrounding land sat waiting for a buyer with a different set of priorities than the original settlers. The miners came for silver and gold. They left when the silver and gold ran out. The land never changed. Only the reason to want it did. What's left after all of that is a straightforward proposition. The buyer who understands what off-grid development actually requires, who has a use for land that doesn't depend on municipal services, and who isn't deterred by terrain that most people will never visit, is looking at a real estate market where the math still works. Acreage that would cost millions in states with competitive land markets is available here in the hundreds or low thousands of dollars, held in place by isolation conditions that deter the conventional buyer but represent the entire value proposition for the unconventional one. The prices aren't a scam, they're what land costs when the only people competing for it are the ones who genuinely want it. 600 ghost towns, and a state that keeps producing these listings because the underlying conditions haven't shifted. Geological isolation, absent infrastructure, no competing municipal buyers. The rush ended, the land stayed, the price settled where it needed to settle, and it's been waiting there since.